Good morning, everyone. My name is Kim. I'm the Children and Young Adult Consultant with the Connecticut State Library, and I am here today with Deb Smith from the Essex Library, the Executive Director, who's going to talk to us about the Library of Things, which, if I'm not mistaken, is an ALA grant. And we've got our first slideshow for CT Pages, which I'm really excited about. So I'm just going to go on ahead and mute myself and turn it over to Deb to tell us all about this awesome sounding program.
Well, thank you so much, Kim. It's such a pleasure to be with you today and to have this opportunity to talk about Essex Library's Library of Things. So our Library of Things is actually now 2 years old, and we started the collection as part of a service focus on environmental sustainability and also addressing income inequality. So I'm going to talk about a little bit of the background of those two things at Essex for you for a second. So I joined Essex Library as Executive Director back in 2019. And one of the very first questions that I had from a town resident was actually a request to stop using pesticides on the library grounds. So that was something that I was like, oh, yeah, we can do that, no problem. So we moved to organic very quickly, but it sort of put into my brain that environmental issues were very important in town. So during my first year as director, we also worked with a town committee called Sustainable Essex. And that work got us thinking more about issues like how to recycle electronic items like computers and printers and phones, as well as reducing the use of plastics. So that's sort of the environmental sustainability part of it, the genesis, if you will. And then our own library history helps illustrate how we approach that second service focus, which is income inequality. So could you just advance to the next little slide there? So Essex Library Association was founded in 1889, and we were started by a local doctor, Dr. Willis Russell. And Willis donated 50 of his own books, and he offered space above his offices for a little lending library. So other residents then donated books as well, and soon the library had more than 600 books. Then the library gained real momentum in 1897 when Captain Joseph Tucker made a bequest. And his bequest enabled construction of our first building at 3 South Main Street. And that's what you see here depicted on your screen in a bicentennial quilt. In the early decades, you paid about $1 a year to have borrowing privileges at the library. So we were an association library, and we continue that today. We're an association library. So we receive support from the town directly, as well as from donors and then an endowment. But what I love about the history for us is that you can imagine the residents in this New England river coastal town coming together for the common good. So a library made good sense then. It was economical to share resources. And it turns out it also makes good environmental sense too, because you sort of are reducing the amount of books and materials that people need to buy or have in their own homes. So now we'll go to the next slide. But going back in time now to my first year at Essex. So as I said, I joined in 2019. But by March of 2020, COVID-19 had started to emerge, and we were quickly into the pandemic. So it was a time of great uncertainty. If you recall, the stock market was plunging wildly. You can see that here. And then in the next slide, people were losing their jobs. So unemployment just went like, phew, you can see it on the chart, just right through the roof. So we immediately knew that we needed to do something to help residents who had lost their jobs. So we added 2 databases for job seekers. And then at the same time, we were concerned about, our income. So our development and finance committees began to look at how we could secure more grant funding for operational needs. And so to prepare for those grant applications, I started to do some research on our demographic base in Essex so that we could make a case for grant funding and also tie it into community needs. So if you look at the next slide, during that research, I looked at the Connecticut Data Collaborative's 2017 profile for Essex, and they're a great resource. So if you haven't used them for grant writing, they're a very good resource. And that showed that 5.7% of town residents lived in poverty. But then I read the United Way's ALICE report for Middlesex County. And if you're not familiar with the term ALICE, it stands for Asset Limited, Income Constrained, employed. So these are folks who are working, but they're not able with their income to really make things, to have a secure, financially secure lifestyle, and to meet all the bills and things that need to be paid. So that 2020 United Way report showed, very alarmingly to me, that 33% of town residents were estimated to be living at or under the ALICE income threshold. So it turned out economic security was a very real concern. And the question became, what could Essex Library do in the 21st century to help with those two issues, economic security and environmental sustainability? So we began by brainstorming at staff meetings, and we sort of agreed that the answer in part was to start a library of things. So we started planning the collection in 2020 by talking about what exactly would we include in a library of things. And we did some research on what other libraries across the country were loaning, how they were doing this. And early on, a lot of our questions were centered on the practicalities, like how long were things going to circulate? Where would the things be checked out? Where would they be returned? Could we even loan things to patrons in other towns via our Lion consortium system or via Deliverit? Or was that just too cumbersome and bulky? How would that work? And then how are we going to assign replacement values? So if we get something like a Wi-Fi hotspot and it goes missing, what do we do about that? Because we want to be able to loan things long-term, right? And then also, did we need to address safety concerns? So loaning a power drill, for example, is very different from loaning a board game, right? There's a little bit more risk involved with the power drill or the power equipment. So we did some research and we actually found that Simsbury Library had a library of things. So we reached out to them and they were very helpful to us. So thank you, Simsbury. And they shared the forms and the procedures that they had developed. So then we actually launched a survey. And if you go to the next slide, you'll see we put out a call to folks to complete a survey for us. And we got information back on what they wanted to see in a library of things. What would they use in a library of things? And we heard some things that we hadn't really thought of, like a solar lamp and projector. These are things that were sort of on our radar. We knew Wi-Fi hotspots, we knew about laptops, but some of those other things came up. Board games too were very popular. So that survey really helped us to sort of pin down what were we going to focus on buying first. We did some more research then, and we collected forms and procedures from a few other libraries across the country. And then we sat down and we looked at our procedures and our own loan rules and sort of were like, well, how is this going to work for us? And what values do we want to assign for us? So we had conversations with our consortium. We're in the Libraries Online, or the Lion consortium. And we talked with their staff to understand what will work best in terms of how to add things to the catalog, how to sort of describe them and put in the borrowing rules. And then we actually developed the waiver form. And so we had a checklist and we had to communicate out to staff, because it's one thing to sort of develop a project like this, but then you have to have the communication right through the organization to make sure everybody knows, okay, somebody wants a projector. How do I actually loan that out? Maybe it's on a Saturday and the usual folks who loan this stuff out aren't there. So making sure everybody knows how to handle loaning those things in the library of things. So we had a checklist for staff, and we communicated our process out at staff meetings and in our weekly emails. And we do require patrons to fill out a waiver when they borrow things, and we keep that waiver on file. So you only have to fill it out once. If you want the power drill or you want the sun lamp, you only have to fill it out once that you're okay with the waiver. And then we keep that on file for you. And then the things get returned to us at the circulation desk. So you actually come into the library to borrow the things, and then you return them into the library as well. So then after getting all that paperwork, those surveys, understanding what we wanted, we were ready to start loaning out the things. So we loaned our very first thing in April of 2021, and that was one of our Wi-Fi hotspots. And then other things that were popular early on were a cordless drill. And you can actually go to the next slide, because we have some pictures of the stuff. We did a picture for our publicity at that time when we were letting people know what we had. You can see we actually have a purse in there. And that was partly to give things to circulate that could be helpful if you were going on a job interview. So we got some donations of like briefcases, some ties, a purse, things like that. So gear that was interview gear, as well as then equipment. And we actually have a keyboard now. We have all sorts of stuff in our library of things. But by far the most popular things, we have a cordless drill, a projector, a luggage scale, all that stuff. But by far the most popular things have been the 2 Wi-Fi hotspots, the cordless drill, and then our Chromebooks have also started to gain ground. So we have also things like a thermal leak detector, a 4-in-1 wall scanner, and I've actually borrowed that myself when I was trying to put in some stuff in my bathroom at home and find out where the studs are in the wall. And we have dinosaur-shaped cake pans. We have board games. And like I said, we have the job interview gear, like the purses and the briefcases. So now the important question is, how do we pay for all of this stuff, right? So part of our collections are funded by our regular operating budget. So we include it, like we know we're going to buy books, we know we're going to buy DVDs, and we know we're going to buy some things. But then another important part has been grant funding. If you could just go to the next slide. So in December 2020, we received a Libraries Transforming Communities Small and Rural Libraries grant from the American Library Association. And we were the only library in Connecticut. They had 3 rounds in that grant program. And we were the only library in Connecticut to receive a grant in round 1. And the focus of our round 1 grant was on raising awareness about income inequality. So as part of that grant, you can see on your screen, we held discussions on books. So we figured, let's do what we know best, which is we can talk about books. And so we selected books that had income inequality as a theme. So you can see there, The Grapes of Wrath, which was by John Steinbeck. So good fit for our classics group. Caste by Isabel Wilkerson. Heartland by Sarah Smarsh. So we tried to pick books, and you can also see, down and out in London and Paris. We tried to pick books that fit well with our existing book groups because we knew we had people in those groups who would read books, and we sort of dedicated the springtime to doing that reading. So you could attend, if you were a regular book group goer, you could just read that one book, or you could read all the books in the series. And then what we did was we had a culminating keynote discussion in May of 2021. And that was on the sort of the one book, one community model, which ALA has. And that was a discussion with Deb and Jim Fallows, who are the authors of Our Towns, a 100,000-mile journey into the heart of America. And we had that connection through a board member who knew the couple. And so we're able to connect us with them. And it turned out to be a fabulous connection because actually they have a documentary about that book. And that documentary was on HBO just the month before they were talking with us. So it was really wonderful to have that tie-in. So we also, in addition to those book discussions, we tied in our library of things into that grant request. So we requested money to add 2 Wi-Fi hotspots to our library of things. So it wasn't just the actual equipment, but it was sort of the ongoing expenses for that first year of those monthly charges that you have to pay on those hotspots. And then we got American Rescue Plan Act money, our ARPA funds, last summer, the summer of 2021. And we used some of that money to buy a closet, a cabinet to store our library of things, because you can imagine we were like, okay, let's just get things, right? And then we had to figure out where are we going to put the things? And we didn't want them to be just sort of out there because some of them were pricey. And so we actually were keeping them back in the staff room. And we said, you know what? We can use some ARPA money to actually get a cabinet to then have them out next to the circulation desk so you can see what we have in the collection. All staff have a key, they can get into the cabinet to get things out. So it was secure for us and it made things much more visible to the borrowers. And then we applied for another grant through the Guilford Savings Bank, which was working with the Community Foundation of Middlesex County. And it was that grant that allowed us to add 6 Google Chromebooks. And so we did a series of programs with those Chromebooks on how to use the Chromebooks, how to maybe, cut the cord from cable TV and be able to stream, and how you could actually, we walked you through how you could actually do that on a Google Chromebook. And then eventually we added those after about 3 months of that type of instruction and tech program use. We then added the Chromebooks into the collection so that you can borrow the Chromebooks directly. And then in late 2021, we were actually invited to apply for additional funding from the American Library Association. And this was I mentioned earlier that they had 3 rounds of their Libraries Transforming Communities for Rural and Small Libraries grant program. And we were invited back as a first round participant. We got invited back to round 3, which was like, okay, we'll go for that. It's more money, we'd love that. And so we added, we applied for that one. And this time it was a focus on climate change and income inequality. And so this month, actually, we have some discussions on that topic. And we are also using some of that money to support our Librarian on the Go program. And that is a program where we actually send our librarians out into the community, and we go to, say, parades or the May Market, which is run by the Essex Garden Club, or we go to schools, or we go there's going to be a Tri-Town Cleanup Day, Earth Day celebration. So we send librarians out, and what we do is we take library card applications. We take new library cards so we can issue them to town residents. We take books from our collection, and then we take things from our library of things so that you can actually be there and you can borrow, the cordless drill if you're doing the DIY home cleanup project. You can actually borrow it right then and there. So you can see that one little idea, that library of things, has actually led to a lot of other initiatives that have sort of rolled on for us, but it all connects back to our environmental awareness, conservation, and then the sharing economy. So that's our library of things, but I'm happy to answer any questions.
Okay, I'm gonna go to stop sharing and try to figure out how to wrap my mind around all of this. Deb, how many people work in the Essex Library? Let's start there, because it sounds like 100. It sounds like in order to have done all that you're doing, there have to be at minimum 100 people, maybe per department. What?
We've got 10. We've got 10. We actually have, now we have 3 full-time librarians, and that includes me. And then we have part-time employees. So it does require staffing. When you're a small library, it can be really hard. And so part of what I hope I communicated there was it's the idea, but then it's also sort of flowing the idea and the commitments through to other programs. So we don't need to, and we didn't need to really reinvent the wheel, so thank you to Simsbury, because they had done a lot of the heavy lifting with those forms and procedures. So we just needed to sort of adapt it to what we could do on our scale. So I'm a big believer, it's sharing. So sharing we share the books and the materials and the things, but it's also sharing the knowledge of how to work this and how to scale it differently.
Yeah. Wow. So were the staff members really involved in sort of the process? I imagine you had a lot to do with the grant writing, sort of, as the director of the library, but sort of the other things like getting the surveys out and stuff, just sort of what was their involvement in the whole lead up to the actual execution of the process?
Absolutely. So it was, we had, as I mentioned, the idea, we brainstormed at our staff meeting. So it was like, how can we do this? What does a library of things look like? Have any of us used a library of things before? And sort of bouncing around the ideas. And then we actually had one staff member who was responsible for sort of the communication with Simsbury Library and finding the samples of forms and procedures. And then she was also the same staff person who did our survey. So we put out our survey, and we linked it into our website. So then we sort of wrap that around, and at staff meetings, we talk about, well, how are we going to communicate this? And we're going to, this other staff member is going to put it in to our Elations newsletter. We're going to get it on social media. So it sort of is taking the project and then using the team to brainstorm and think about, okay, what are the various pieces that we need? And then also, what did we forget? What isn't included that we need to think about? Mm-hmm. So a real power of the team.
That's amazing. I love seeing that. instead of sort of being stymied by the fact that there isn't a huge 100-person per department staff, you just sort of lean into what you have and play to people's strengths. And I think that's absolutely perfect. So you said you involved the community, right? You asked the community, what do you want? What do you need? You took into account the first person who said, can we stop using pesticides? What's the community response to this been, this library of things?
Yeah, so it's actually, I have the, we would love to see more people using the library of things. And so we do have, it seems like it sort of goes in cycles. So the solar, the winter lamp, I don't want to call it the sad lamp, but it's a lamp which, gives you the sun, the light in winter. Yep. That's of course more popular, when it's darker out. But sort of our most popular things are those Google Chromebooks, the Wi-Fi hotspots, the cordless drill. We also have sort of the travel collection, and it's funny because we were starting to develop that right before COVID hit, and that was like nobody wanted to travel. So we have like little luggage locks that you can use. We have the luggage scale, so that you're not overweight on the bag when you go to the airport, and all of that. So we thought, oh, travel's going to be great, and then COVID hit, and it was like, okay, well, those things haven't like circled in 2 years, right?
Right.
So we would love to let people know that we have travel stuff that you can check out, but it's really been sort of the digital things that connect people. So the Wi-Fi hotspots, the Chromebooks, the sun lamps, the cordless drill, the stud finder seems to go out every once in a while. And it's equipment, I would say anecdotally, that it's the equipment that is sort of the pricier stuff to buy that you, but that you rarely need. Like, the stud finder, I wasn't going to go out. It might be whatever it is, 30, 40 bucks, but it's like, okay, that's 30, 40 bucks. That's in my pocket. And I save myself the trip to Home Depot or wherever I'm going to go. I get it right from the library. And then, 3 days later, I don't need to have it in the house for 10 years. I only needed it for that one weekend. So why not go to the library and get it from the library?
Yeah. Well, same with like the dinosaur cake pan, right? Like how many dinosaur cakes are you going to make in a year? Not many. One. The answer is actually one.
Right. Yeah. Yeah.
I also just randomly want to say, like, I'm really in love with the fact that you circulate job things. I don't know why that sort of touched my heart. And I think it's just because so many people were affected by COVID. So many people who maybe hadn't been in the job market in a really long time and suddenly were kind of dropped back in there. That just, I wanted to cry a little bit. That's not that it matters. I don't live in Essex, but I just want you to know that something about that is I think so lovely.
Yeah, and we tied that in. I don't know if I mentioned this, but we did use grant funding for databases. So we had a Job Now database, and we actually added, when we got grant money, we actually added, then they have a product, Brainfuse has a product called Vet Now, which, and Essex has a higher percentage of veterans than is the state sort of average. So we knew that could potentially be a good database for us to add. So we added in Vet Now. And then we also added in, Data Axle has a product called Reference Solutions. So we do have a lot of very highly skilled, highly trained professionals in Essex. So the type of information that they need when they're doing a job search, they need sort of like the corporate earnings, they need the, the more proprietary type of information, the research-based data, so that if they're going to go into an interview, they are very well informed. So we actually added that database as well.
Wow.
Yeah.
I mean, you so succinctly just kind of put it all together. I don't really have anything else. I guess if someone watches this, which they will, because I'm probably going to rewatch it. So if someone watches this and, they're kind of like, I really think that the Library of Things is appropriate for our community, what would kind of be some of the first steps you would encourage them, to take if this is something that they're investigating for their community?
Yeah, so I think getting the circulation information from the other libraries in the state that have a Library of Things could be really helpful to you, because you can avoid buying things for your collection that are not going to circulate, or you could actually borrow things from the other library of things for your patron, right? So it seems like, I think you're never going to go wrong with the Wi-Fi hotspots, the Google Chromebooks, those things that bridge the digital divide. But then there are also things that I was asking, what does, so maybe dinosaurs are not sort of the thing for the cake pans for you. Maybe it's something else, right? But finding out sort of what resonates in your community is really important. So having that survey, I think, is a really important part of the piece. And it's funny, also Googling the stuff. So it's, as we were getting ready to have this conversation, I actually Googled Essex Library of Things. And we often get phone calls because there are a lot of Essexes in the world.
Yeah.
So we get phone calls about Essex in Maryland. We've gotten phone calls about Essex in England. And I noticed that Essex in England developed a library of things about 6 months after we did. And I'd love to think that maybe it was because patrons were Googling, Essex Library, and they found our library of things. And then that sort of, but you never know. But I think it's lots of people are sort of onto this sharing economy.
Yeah.
And it really works well for libraries, no matter where you are in the world.
That's amazing. And I'm going to sit in my head and heart with the fact that Essex, England was like, Essex Connect, we got to get on this. I'm just going to live in the truth of that because I find it lovely. But thank you so much for talking to us, Deb. I was writing down other things where I'm like, we're going to have Deb back for this. We're going to have Deb back for that. So you'll be getting more emails. People will be seeing more of you, or at least your library, on the CT pages of conversations. But thank you for sharing this with us. And I'm definitely going to rewatch this video because it was just great to watch.
Well, thank you. It's my pleasure. And feel free to stop by and borrow something from our library of things.
Like a dinosaur cake pan.
There you go.